Montana Territory, 1883. The wind blew sharp through the valley as Weston Norrin stepped down from his horse and tied the reins to the post outside the Red Wheel Saloon. He had not planned to stop in the town of Ashrock. Just meant to water his horse, maybe grab a meal if the place did not stink of trouble. But then he saw her. She was on her knees with a bucket, scrubbing the blood out of the floorboards near the back wall. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, hands raw from lye water, and her dark brown hair was tied back in a loose knot that kept falling over her eyes. She pushed it back again and again, her jaw set tight. Her dress was plain and worn, and her boots looked too thin for the cold floor she worked on. But it was her face that stopped Weston, still not just the fierce focus in it, but the way her eyes flinched when the saloon owner barked at her. "You missed the corner, Elira. That whole wall's still stained, and do not even think about stopping before midnight." "Yes, mister." "Laren," she answered, low and even. Weston stepped through the batwing doors and walked straight to the bar. The owner, a sweating, red-nosed man with a limp, turned and gave Weston a greasy grin. "What can I do you for, stranger? Whiskey, steak?" "Neither," Weston said. He looked past him at the woman scrubbing the floor. "How much does she owe?" The man's smile dropped. "That is none of your concern." Weston set his hat on the bar. "I just made it mine." The saloon quieted, cards stopped shuffling, chairs scraped faintly as a few men leaned in. Laren licked his lips. "She owes $20 for the doctor who stitched her up, another $10 for board, and another $15 for the damage when she broke my upstairs lamp." Elira stood slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. "That is not true." "I never broke that lamp." "You bled all over the sheets, too," the saloon owner snapped. "That was not free." Weston reached into his coat and pulled out his coin pouch. He counted out the coins slow, like every cent mattered. 45, was it?" Laren nodded, too quick. Weston laid the money out on the bar in neat stacks. "She is clear now." The saloon owner snatched it up, grumbling under his breath. Weston turned to Elira, who stood frozen in place, eyes wide with disbelief. "Come sit," Weston said gently. "You look like you forgot how to rest." She did not move. "I do not want anything from you," he added. "You are free to walk out those doors if you want, but I would like to sit with you just a little while." Elira's jaw trembled. She hesitated, then stepped forward, slow and cautious, like someone might grab her from behind. Weston pulled out a chair and waited until she sat, then took the one beside her. She stared at the table, hands folded in her lap. The noise of the saloon came back in laughter, boots tapping, a piano key or two. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Weston replied. "But I could." She looked at him then. Her eyes were hazel, rimmed with red, like she had not slept right in weeks. "Why? Because someone should." She blinked fast and turned her gaze away, but not before he saw the tears start to rise. She pressed her fingertips to her eyelids. "I did not ask for help," she whispered. "I know," Weston said. "But maybe you do not always have to." She gave a soft, shaky laugh, no smile yet, but it was close. He waited. After a long silence, she finally said, "Elira Zane. I came up from Wyoming last year, was supposed to be just passing through." He nodded. "Weston Norrin. I was headed north." "Looks like I am delayed." She looked at him again, this time with something softer in her expression, like trust trying to find space. "Are you always like this?" she asked. "Like what kind?" Without asking for anything back, he leaned back in his chair. "I do not know." "Are you always this stubborn about accepting help?" That earned him the first smile, small, fragile, but real. She looked down and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I was working in the back room when a drunk grabbed my arm," she said after a while. "I shoved him hard. He cracked his head on a table on his way down. Laren said I owed him for the trouble, said I could work it off." Weston's jaw tensed, but he kept his voice level. "You should not have had to." "Well," she said with a bitter breath, "I did not have many options. You do now." She looked at him again, longer this time. "What are you offering? A ride somewhere better, or a warm fire to sit beside, or just company for tonight?" "You choose." Elira studied him, and he let her. After a long moment, she leaned back in the chair and let out a breath like a weight was sliding off her chest. I would not mind just sitting a while. Weston gave her the smallest nod. Then we sit. They stayed like that as the saloon noise faded around them. She did not speak again for a long time, but she did not look away from him either. And when she finally smiled, a full, soft smile that reached her tired eyes, something inside Weston settled. He had not come looking for her, but he had found her all the same. By morning, the wind had quieted. Pale blue light filtered through the window of the boarding room Weston had taken above the livery. He buckled his belt in silence, listening to the sounds below: the shuffle of boots, a hammer tapping from the blacksmith shed, a wagon creaking over frost-hardened ruts. It was a town waking up the way towns do after too many bitter nights. He found Elira in the stable, brushing down the bay gelding he'd left tied after supper. Her sleeves were rolled again, but this time the work looked chosen. Her cheeks were wind-chapped, and she hadn't noticed him yet. "You missed his left flank," Weston said as he approached, voice low. She straightened, startled, then offered a nod that wasn't quite a greeting. "I was letting him lean into the curry first." Weston stopped beside her and watched the horse twitch its ears in contentment. "You always that patient. I think better when I've got something to do with my hands." He glanced at the brush in hers, then at the worn leather satchel hanging on a peg nearby. "You planning to head out today?" "I hadn't decided yet," she said, keeping her eyes on the horse's shoulder. "Didn't think I'd wake up with choices." He waited, letting the silence do the asking. "I've got a cousin outside Helena," she said finally, "if she's still there. We used to write, but the last letter came over a year ago. You still have it, in my satchel. Along with the rest of what I own." Weston leaned against the stall door. "You want to ride that far, I'll take you." She turned toward him, arms folded now. "Why?" "Because the roads between here and there aren't kind. And I figure you deserve better than walking them alone." Her gaze held his, firm and unreadable. "I don't like owing anyone." "You don't. I'm offering, not trading." Elira looked away, jaw tight. "I don't know if she'll take me in. She married a banker. Might not want someone with dirt under her nails showing up on the porch." "You'd rather stay here?" "No." The word came sharp. "No, I wouldn't." Weston gave a slow nod. "Then we'll ride at first light tomorrow. You can think on it today." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. They spent the rest of the morning in the stable. Weston repaired a broken stirrup strap while Elira fed the horses, tossing hay in practiced rhythm. When the bell rang noon, they walked down to the general store together. She kept a hand near her skirts, wary of the glances from passing men, but Weston didn't let the space between them close too far. Inside, she stood quiet while he bought supplies. Flour, salt, dried beef, coffee. She didn't ask for anything, didn't touch a thing. Just watched, like she was waiting for the moment he'd remember she wasn't his concern anymore. "You hungry?" he asked once they stepped back onto the boardwalk. "I could eat." They sat beneath the awning of the bakery, sharing a loaf of still warm bread and a wedge of sharp cheese. She ate slow, cautious, like someone used to saving half for later. "I used to live over a bakery," she said, voice soft. "Before Wyoming, the smell of yeast in the morning, it stuck to everything." Weston chewed his mouthful and waited. "My father was a cooper," she continued. "Barrels, buckets, anything round. He taught me how to shave staves when I was 12. Her gaze drifted. "He died in the spring floods after that. Things went sideways. You been on your own since then." "I had someone for a while." Her fingers tightened around the crust. "But he got himself shot trying to cheat at faro in Cheyenne. I didn't know until someone tossed his coat at me." Weston looked out across the street where a boy was chasing a chicken through the dust. "That the man who left you bleeding here?" "No." Her voice dropped. "That was someone else." "I don't learn quick, I guess. You're still here. That says something." She didn't answer, but this time she didn't retreat either. When the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of ash and fire, they returned to the stable. Elira checked the saddlebag Weston had packed, quietly moving a few things to make better use of the space. He didn't stop her. "You trust me to ride beside you?" she asked once she finished. I do. She stood quiet for a long moment, then said, If I go with you and I get to Helena and my cousin isn't there, then what? He met her eyes. Then we figure out what comes next, together. Elira studied him, something unspoken shifting in her expression. Then she gave a single, steady nod. All right, she said. First light. The tone in her voice had changed. Not soft, but certain. Weston touched the brim of his hat. I'll have the horses ready. As he walked back toward the boarding house, he didn't glance over his shoulder. He didn't need to. Something had passed between them that didn't need naming. Not yet. But it was there, solid as saddle leather, quiet as snowfall, sure as dawn. They rode out at first light, as planned. The frost had silvered the grass, and the horse's breath came in soft clouds. Weston led them out the northern edge of ash rock, cutting toward the foothills where the pines began to climb. The path wasn't a road so much as a suggestion-hard, packed earth broken now and then by rock and root, but the gelding handled it fine. And Elira's mare, a lean chestnut with a quiet gait, kept pace without fuss. They didn't talk much those first miles. Just the creak of saddle leather, the jingle of tack, and the birds waking in the trees. Elira rode with her hands steady on the reins, eyes sweeping the country ahead like she was memorizing it. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge overlooking a low valley. Weston dismounted first and tied his horse to a branch. Elira followed, sliding down without a word, knees stiff from the ride. She stretched her legs, then moved toward the edge of the ridge. Never seen land open up like this, she said after a long pause. Back east, you said, near the Ohio River, trees too thick to see much else. Weston crouched beside a flat stone and pulled a linen bundle from his saddlebag. He unwrapped a piece of cornbread and passed it to her. Thanks, she said, breaking it in half. How long you think till we reach Helena? 3 days steady, maybe 4 if we run into weather. She nodded, chewing slow. You ever been this far north? He asked. No, closest I got was Cheyenne before I headed west. Everything after that was guessing. He didn't speak right away, just watched the wind comb through the grass below. Then, why Helena? She wiped crumbs from her fingers. Because nowhere else made sense, and because I thought. Maybe I'd find someone who remembered me before things went wrong. Weston looked over. You want to be remembered or forgiven? Elira's jaw worked before she answered. Both, but I'll take the first if that's all I can get. A pine cone dropped somewhere behind them, startling a bird into flight. She turned toward the sound, shoulders high before easing again. You good with a rifle? She asked, changing the subject. Well enough. There's tracks near the creek back there, not deer. He stood without a word and followed her back down the slope. She pointed to the mud where the hooves had pressed deep, 4 toes wide spread, bare likely young. Weston knelt beside the print and touched the edge of the indentation. Passed through early, he said. No scent left. Probably headed to higher ground. Relief flickered across her face, quick and careful. They made camp that night near a small stream, tucked between 2 boulders that gave wind shelter. Elira gathered dry moss and found a few pine branches brittle enough to burn. Weston built the fire up slow, shaping the flames with practiced hands. He cooked beans in a tin pot and handed her the first tin plate without speaking. She sat cross-legged, eating with the quiet hunger of someone used to rationing. Afterward, she rinsed the dishes in the stream and set them upside down near the fire to dry. You always travel alone? She asked, drying her hands on her skirt, most times. Why? He leaned back on his bedroll, hat tilted low over his brow. Some men fit better in silence. She studied him over the fire. You don't strike me as someone running from things. I'm not, he said. I just know how fast things get taken away. So I go slow and I don't hold tight to more than I can carry. Elira pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Maybe that's smart. They fell into silence again, but it wasn't the wary kind. It felt like something else now, like the hush between words that don't need saying. Later, when she bedded down near the fire, she turned once to look at him. You think it's foolish to hope somebody's still waiting for you after all this time? She asked. I don't think hope's ever foolish, he said. She didn't answer out loud, but she didn't look away either. After a while, she closed her eyes. Weston kept watch a while longer, listening to the fire crackle, the wind shift through the trees. Somewhere out there the land stretched north, cold and wide. But here in this small circle of warmth something was changing. Not sudden, not loud, just steady. Like trust, earned one quiet mile at a time. The second day brought low clouds and a cold that seeped through wool. They rode through a narrow cut where the trees stood close and the earth sloped sharp on either side. Snow clung to the shaded banks, dusting the underbrush in thin, stubborn patches that hadn't melted with the last thaw. Elira rode ahead for a stretch, her posture upright, eyes scanning the trail like she was reading something written in the dirt. Weston let her take the lead without comment. She didn't speak until they crested a rise and saw smoke drifting in the far distance, thin and gray. A cabin, she asked, not turning. Could be, Weston said. Or someone burning off brush. Either way, we keep our distance. She nodded and kept riding. By late afternoon, the trail narrowed into a rocky descent, and they dismounted to lead the horses. Weston's boots found solid footing with practiced ease, but Elira hesitated on the steeper slope. He slowed his pace, letting her match him without needing to ask. At the bottom, they crossed a shallow creek. Weston checked the horses' hooves for stones while Elira knelt by the bank, cupping water into her mouth. She stood, wiping her face on her sleeve, and looked at him for the first time that day with something close to curiosity. "You were a soldier once," she said. He tightened the cinch on his gelding's saddle. "I was." "Which side?" "Union, 3rd Missouri Cavalry." She watched him a moment. "You keep it quiet. No need to drag old ghosts through new ground." She nodded slowly, as if weighing what to say next. "My father fought for the Confederacy, lost 2 fingers at Antietam. He never talked about it either." Weston didn't ask which fingers. Instead, he picked up the reins. "We'll camp on the ridge tonight." Safer ground. They hobbled the horses just past the tree line, near a cluster of flat stones that offered shelter from the wind. Elira gathered pine needles for bedding, steady and quiet. Weston built a fire with a dry branch he split using the heel of his boot and a hatchet he kept wrapped in canvas. As the flames rose, Elira drew her coat tighter. "You ever think about settling?" He glanced up. "Sometimes. Then I see what passes for peace in most towns. You think it's worse than the road? Not always. But I've seen land claimed by men who never earned it and lawmen who sell justice by the weight of a purse." She pulled her knees up and rested her arms on them. "You think that's all there is? I think there are some places left that ain't rotted through, just hard to find." Elira was quiet for a long time, watching the fire shift. "My mother was born in Indiana. She used to sing while she washed clothes, little songs too soft to carry far. I don't remember the words, just the way her voice sounded through wet linen." Weston said nothing but reached for a stick and eased a coal back into place. "She died when I was 16, Elira went on. "Took sick in February. My father buried her behind the coop, said the land was too frozen to dig deep." "That winter was hard everywhere," Weston said. "I remember it." She didn't look at him. "I always meant to visit that grave again, but I never did. You still could." Elira gave a faint shake of her head. "Too many miles behind me now." The fire cracked, and a gust of wind stirred the trees. Weston reached into his coat and pulled out a thin cloth bundle. He unfolded it to reveal a small tin flask and passed it to her. "It's rye," he said. "Won't do much, but it'll take the edge off the cold." She took it without hesitation and drank. When she handed it back, her voice was quieter. "You ever lose someone close?" He stared into the fire a moment before answering. "A brother, not by war. Fever took him in Kansas, back before I enlisted." Elira waited, but he said no more. That night she laid her bedroll closer to the fire than before, not beside him but near enough that the heat reached both. When she settled under her blanket, she turned her face toward him, not away. "You don't talk much," she said. "I say what needs saying." She gave a sound that might have been a laugh, faint and dry. "Maybe that's enough." He didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. The wind shifted once more, softer this time. And in the stillness that followed, something settled between them. Not comfort exactly, but a kind of quiet knowing. No promises, no declarations, only a growing sense that whatever came next, they'd ride toward it together. They reached Helena by late afternoon on the fourth day, the air sharp with the bite of melting snow. The town had grown more buildings than Weston remembered, brick fronts now, where timber once stood. Wagons rattled over the main street, and the scent of coal smoke and horse sweat drifted through the air. Elira kept her eyes forward, hands steady on the reins, but he could see the tension in her jaw. "I'll wait with the horses," Weston said, once they reached the corner of the post office. "You can ask inside." Elira nodded once and stepped down. She brushed the dust from her skirts and squared her shoulders before walking through the door. Weston stayed by the rail, one hand resting on his gelding's withers. The minutes stretched. When Elira stepped back outside, her face gave nothing away. She moved east, married a man in St. Paul, left last spring, she said. No forwarding address. Weston didn't speak, just handed her the reins. They walked the outskirts of town until they found a small boarding house with a whitewashed porch and a woman who offered beds without asking questions. Weston paid for a room with 2 cots and left his saddlebag hanging on the peg by the door. Elira stood by the window for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. "I thought I'd feel something, getting here, even if she wasn't, but I don't." "You don't have to," Weston said, setting his hat on the table. She turned around. "What do I do now? You choose," he said. "That's the difference now." She sat down slowly on the edge of the cot. "I don't know what choosing looks like. I've only ever followed what was left." He leaned his back against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "You're not who you were back in Ashrock or in Cheyenne. You don't have to be. I don't have anywhere to go. You've got me." His voice was quiet, but there was no weight of question in it. Just fact. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she looked up, her eyes steady. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't offer it if I didn't." Elira stood. She crossed the space between them slow, without hesitation. Her hand came to rest against his chest, light as ash. Then she leaned in, and he met her there, the kiss soft and certain. Later, they sat on the porch after supper, wrapped in blankets against the early spring chill. The town had gone quiet. A dog barked once in the distance, and someone hummed a hymn faintly from a window down the street. "I used to think peace was something you had to earn," Elira said, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "But maybe it's not about earning it. Maybe it's just about not running." "You're not running anymore," Weston said, his arm around her waist. "No," she said. "I'm not." They stayed there until the stars came out, the sky deepening to a soft ink blue. He didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't pull away. 2 months later, they married in a small chapel west of town. The preacher was young, his hands ink-stained from writing sermons, and his wife pressed wildflowers into Elira's hair. Weston wore his cleanest shirt and stood tall, his voice steady as he said the words. They bought a parcel of land near the river, a place with good soil and a stand of cedar trees along the edge. Weston built the house himself, with Elira measuring each wall and window to be sure the light would fall right in the mornings. She planted herbs by the back door and hung a tin bell from the eaves to chime in the wind. By the 3rd winter, the house was filled with warmth that came not just from the hearth, but from the quiet rhythm they'd made early mornings with coffee and bread, evenings spent mending harness or reading by lamplight. They spoke seldom of the roads behind them, not out of silence, but because what lay ahead required their full hearts. And each night when the fire burned low and the world outside turned to frost, Elira would rest her hand against Weston's chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers, and know that this life, this man was hers, and he hers. Always.